G'day guys, Mark here. I've got another one of my short stories for everyone. This one, and the reason I'm wearing this shirt right over the top of my normal shirt, is about this hat. You've seen very little of it on the channel. I just used it at 4570, but it's actually something that lives on in my wardrobe. It's something that is from a long time ago, something that I bought in the 80s, and many stories and lots of water under the bridge between now and then. But this hat did a good, I don't know exactly, but somewhere around the probably 8 years of hard work to end up looking like this, and then it's dragged around with me. So it's still alive. It's a hat that, well, I suppose I'll tell you a little bit more of the story as to where it comes from. Back in the 80s, finished Year 12 school in Albany, Western Australia. At that same time, as much as school was something I no longer was attracted to very much, and as most people know, I became a mechanic. Actually, after that, I was on my way to university and decided that no, I wasn't going to do any more of that. I'd had enough of listening to people like that, and decided I'd go and be a mechanic. Something I could have started 2-3 years earlier, but no, that's when I did that. More complicated bits to that story then, but amongst all that, I was playing a game called polocrosse. So now polocrosse is not what Prince Charles plays. Polocrosse is described, I suppose, by people back then at least, as a mix between polo and rugby, or the poor man's polo. So it meant that we didn't have lots of horses. We had one horse if we're lucky, and we towed things around with V8 utes and horse floats on the back of it, and it was very much a good weekend where we got to learn a fair bit about life. I got to meet a lot of the other world, I suppose, the previous world. A lot of the people and stuff that I looked up to were guys that were in their 50s and 60s and learned from people with horses and drays and things in the beginning of the century sort of knowledge. So lots about horses, and a lot about having fun and drinking and partying on Saturday nights with a cabaret and all sorts of things of a different world, a gone by era. But part of that world was, it was a bit of a sort of a cowboy thing. We certainly wore all the gear. We had the spurs, had the horses, had the saddles, had all that sort of stuff. Was part of the process, and we were always out in the sun. It was done in the middle of summertime in Western Australia. So that meant that as a young man, I largely had no shirt on. I was a very dark colour for what it was. I had white legs because I always had my riding pants on. Moleskins, or longhorns they were actually. But I needed a good cowboy hat, and I had a not so good cowboy hat, and I went and found myself a good cowboy hat, which is what this started off like. And I suppose that's where the story starts. I went and I wasn't a rich man at all, or a rich boy at all. I went and spent all I could on buying a hat that would fit my slightly larger noggin. In this very nice white looking hat that was a bit tall, and I didn't realise at the stage it was something that I thought, listen, I could pull that look off. That was pretty nice, very nice clean hat. And so I got this hat and I took it to a polocrosse carnival. Now that polocrosse carnival was at Narrabeen. It was a club called Evergreens. And I was just sort of getting to meet the world. It's sort of fresh getting into this world of what polocrosse was and that sort of stuff. I had some sort of friends and that type of thing there. But it was, it was the beginning of the coming of age, I suppose, in some fashions. I won't try and get too much into that, maybe later on. But I showed up with proud as punch of my new hat. And within probably, I don't know, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes of actually pulling up there and unloading the horse and doing that sort of stuff, when I got out and put my hat on to say, how you going, to the closest people I knew there, my mate at that time, he was probably been in that world a little longer than me, and he could see something glaringly obvious, which I couldn't see. That was his fresh new hat. So what he did was he grabbed the hat, he chucked on the ground, he jumped up and down on it with his boots, he body slammed it, he chucked it in the water trough, he chucked on the ground again, he jumped up and down again. And then he ran off laughing. So immediately I was mortified and fairly offended. It didn't take me too long to figure out what was going on, that it was too shiny and white. But to me, it was also, I'd spent all this money and you reckon this hat. It wasn't broken, actually. He knew a bit more than he was doing. Maybe it happened to his hat. I never had that story explained. But it was actually the beginning of what made this hat what it is, why it looks like it does and why it is important to me, and I suppose a bit the nature of a hat. And actually it's a bit of a story about a lot of things actually, but I'll just talk about the hat. It's sort of straightened back out, and with a bit of washing and things like that, it had already gone from fresh and new to something that had a little bit of character. But what you're looking at is something that's been through much more than that. The hat's been slept on when there was nothing else to rest my head. This hat's been taken by many a young filly to wear, because that's what happens in those sort of situations where there's dancers and cabarets and things like that. The first sign that they like is they steal your hat and wear your hat. It's been there through torrential rain of weekends where there's nothing but rain and the hat's been there. And you know what? Well, people who know hats, and maybe that's not the whole world anymore, but felt starts to fall to pieces in those places. It's got these little, somewhere around here, this little bit, there's a little ribbon on the front there. That's what it used to be dressed with. When you went to a polocrosse carnival, you didn't get a ticket. What you got was a little safety pin with two bits of the club's colours on there that you'd pin on the band here. That's where you wore the fact that you had been to that polocrosse club, that carnival. And I used to have lots of them. Those safety pins have all rusted off and gone, and there's little stains on the band there, that side of things. There's lots of stories that go with what the hat's been. I used to travel away to the end of my polocrosse career. I travelled around on my motorbike, which I've mentioned everyone before, where I had my saddle and I had my boots. I'd wear my riding boots and the leather neck riding boots, and my hat would be squashed up in my gear sack, so I could get there. And I would generally be a borrowed player, or a team that didn't have a player. I would go and play for that team on a borrowed horse. So someone would provide a horse, I'd have the saddle, my racket and that sort of stuff. So this hat's seen all that sort of stuff. This hat's seen me sleeping on by the campfire when I don't have a tent. This hat's seen all sorts of things in a great, wonderful time of life to be around. That's back in the 80s, and back when, I don't know, the world was in a different place, and certainly I was in a different place. The stories about the fact of what you're looking at is much more than a hat, much more than something you can buy. And I suppose it's also looking at a process of that the shine and the glitter and the gleam and that sort of stuff sometimes aren't the most important thing. Sometimes the actual scars are the bit that's more important, which is a bit more about a human character. Sometimes how well you wear your scars, how strong or how worthy you've become out of the pain you went through, which maybe you didn't realise you had to go through. But this hat, for sure, it doesn't look anything like it started, and it would be worth nothing to me as the fresh new hat that I had, unless it had had that life to turn it into what you're looking at. Anyway guys, that's starting to get a bit preachy, sorry. Just a story about this hat, and yeah, it'll show up some more, but it's got a pretty good pride and place in the it's like I said, in the wardrobe in the bedroom. Anyway guys, thanks for checking in. I'll catch you next time.